SM, the Bay Area's only education station.
Funding for rock and roll is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the annual financial support of viewers like you. The Experience Music Project, a celebration of creativity and innovation through American popular music and culture, opening in Seattle in 1998. The National Endowment for the Arts.
And by the Boston Beer Company, brewers of Samuel Adams. Do you love beer?
And Radio Shack, with its line of Optimus audio equipment, official sponsor of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum.
It's a sound, it's a feeling. It's a different type of feeling that comes forth from people who have been singers in the church.
I say it's all right.
The tone for black music of the 1960s was set by Ray Charles. His 1954 recording of I've Got a Woman broke new ground as a celebration of music from the church, but with lyrics of love and romance.
I've got a woman way over town, good to me. Yes, I have. I've got a woman way over town, good to me. I know.
This secularized gospel sound appealed to blacks and whites alike and would become the backbone of black music for the next decade and a half. From the polished dance music of Motown to the raw emotion of Southern soul.
Yes, I have.
Now don't you send me no doctor, filling me up with all of those pills. All we need is music, sweet music. There'll be music everywhere. There'll be swinging, swaying, and records playing, dancing in the street.
You know I feel all right. Feel pretty good, y'all.
We used to call it cornbread. Cornbread singer, you know, you get that, that's strength, you know what I mean? And this carried us through the era of the R&B era, because it actually was what we learned in church.
Long, tall Sally, twisting with Lucy, doing the what to say.
When we did I Got a Woman, that's where it all started from. You know, because a lot of people said, oh, that's a religious song, and you just change the words around and da-da-da, this and da-da-da. So, and so you're being sacrilegious and you're being this and you're being that and you know. And my answer to that was, at this point, since I've given up trying to sound like Nat Cole, I'm gonna be what I am, and I don't give a damn who like it and who don't.
Sam Cooke liked it. In 1957, the 26-year-old Cooke abandoned a successful career with the gospel soul stirrers and made the leap to the more lucrative world of pop.
Send
adults, none of them liked the idea. Sam Cooke, who was one of their idols when he was with the Soulsters, singing pop music. I mean, like my grandmother and her friends and the whole neighborhood was like, I remember hearing conversations how bad they thought that was, because young people thought it was great.
At first I thought it was infatuation, but ooh, it's lasted.
You Send Me was a crossover sensation, reaching #1 and selling nearly 2 million singles. Sam Cooke's artistic and commercial success inspired scores of young African Americans, including one who would soon become the most powerful force in black music, the founder of Motown Records, Berry Gordy Jr. of Detroit. Gordy had dropped out of high school in 1945 and spent the next 5 years seeking his fortune as a professional boxer and hanging out around Detroit's jazz clubs.
We had the greatest show in the city, and cars would be lined up from one end of John R. to the other, and you had all them big Cadillacs and stuff going up there. It was a grand old age. Well, during this time, Berry Gordy was in the back door. He'd be standing back there looking in because he's too young to come in.
Gordy came of age living on Detroit's east side. His love for jazz persisted, although the blues and R&B were far more popular in the neighborhood.
In my neighborhood, jazz was not popular at all. But I had just come out of the Army, and it had been very much a part of my life before I went into the Army and all that, and I was really into it. So when I came out, first thing I wanted to do was go into business and open up a jazz record store, which is what I did. But the people in my neighborhood, they had other ideas. I mean, they wanted Muddy Waters and B.B. King and Fats Domino. I stocked up in blues records, and people came back to buy it, but it was too late. It was too late to save my store, but it was not too late for me to realize the emotions of people and the simplicity that they love to hear, and which was always in me all the time.
Lonely Teardrops was written by Berry Gordy and Billy Davis in 1958. The failure of his jazz record store convinced Gordy to stick with music that was simple and direct. And Lonely Teardrops was a smash, reaching #1 on the R&B chart and crossing over to the white pop chart.
It was very important to make sure it had crossover potential. It had to have a sound that wasn't threatening to the general audience or the pop disc jockeys or the program directors, threatening anything that was too funky, too bluesy was a little bit threatening. No, that's not for our audience. This would be the spill that you would get. So it was okay for it to have a rhythm and a beat, as long as you didn't get too funky with it.
The best things in life are free, but you can give them to the birds and bees. I need
Early in 1959, with several crossover hits to his credit, Gordy borrowed $800 from his family and launched what would become the Motown Empire. At a time when America's civil rights movement was in its infancy and black ownership virtually unknown in the music business, Gordy boldly labeled his building Hitsville, USA. And within 2 years, he had the #2 pop hit in the country.
My mama told me, you better shop around. Oh, yeah, you better shop around. Shop around.
It was on the market playing in Detroit on the radio stations. Berry Gordy decided that the rhythm was not, the beat was not proper. He just needed a little bit of a change. He called us about 3 o'clock in the morning and said, I want all you guys to come back to the studio.
Smokey got up and got the rest of the group over to the studio, and we did it. And he said, well, what's wrong? He still didn't know what's wrong. And I said, the tempo is too slow. He said, but we all liked it before. And I said, I don't care about before, but it's just too slow. We've got to perk it up. The piano player didn't show up, and so I ended up playing the piano, and and it turned out to be our first million seller.
Oh, yes, wait a minute, Mr. Postman. Wait, hey.
Gordy's first #1 record came from another local group, fresh from high school, the Marvelettes. And their album cover pictured a cartoon mailbox, since many record stores would not display albums that showed black faces. Motown's roster soon included 18-year-old Mary Wells, often backed by a young male group called the Temptations.
Well, I've got two lovers and I ain't ashamed. Two lovers and I love them both the same. Do you love me? I can really move. Do you love me? I'm in the groove. Do you love me?
The Contours, who would have one big hit but were too rough-edged to meet Gordy's crossover requirements. Marvin Gaye, son of a Pentecostal minister and soon to marry Berry Gordy's sister, Anna.
I try to put my arms around you, all because I wanna hold you tight.
Clap your hands just a little bit louder. Clap your hands just a little bit louder.
12-year-old blind Steveland Morris, soon rechristened Little Stevie Wonder. And Motown secretary Martha Reeves, who began to record with two backup singers, as Martha and the Vandellas.
Here's your old friendship ring. I can't wait no more.
It's amazing how fast Motown grew. I was only a secretary there for 9 months. But at the end of that 9 months, everybody was famous. Everybody had a record out, and I never looked back. I gave my job to 3 girls from Secretarial College.
The first hit for Martha and the Vandellas was written by 3 young Detroiters who grew up steeped in gospel music. Brothers Eddie and Brian Holland teamed with Lamont Dozier to write over 24 top 10 songs during the mid-60s.
That's our favorite song right there. It took me a while to write songs. I couldn't do them real quick. It would take me some time to sort of juggle each word around and this word around, mostly to go for the feeling of it, you know. Not necessarily the rhyming, the feeling, you know, where you could feel it, where you could walk away and it would be sort of a haunting feeling, you know, and my concept was always basically if you missed 30% or 50% of the lyric, you would still know what the song was about.
Here's your old friendship ring.
Simple, memorable lyrics had been a Berry Gordy trademark since his early days with Billy Davis. Another was a strong, irresistible drum beat that anybody could dance to.
At that time, but when Holland Dozier Holland came on the scene, it became rhythm out front. They had stomping boards. They'd take a board and put on some 2x4 and stand on it and stomp. They'd shake chains, scratch on the wall. They did all kind of sounds and rhythm, man. They were just creative. Anything that sounded pretty decent, they do.
The Motown sound would never have happened had the musicians not been the skillful guys that they were and the tasty jazz musicians that they were, because they allowed us to be heard. They played special things where you could fit your vocals in just like they fitted their music together. That's the reason for the real grooves that we had and still maintain in our music, because of the Funk Brothers.
Funk Brothers was the nickname for the Motown studio band. Berry Gordy had met most of them in Detroit's jazz clubs in the 50s, and their polished musicianship gave a solid foundation to the records made by Motown's young writers and producers.
They were not only excellent musicians, but they could read. So therefore, just imagine okay? If you're dealing with some young producers who really don't read music, and if they dealt with people that were playing by ear and couldn't read music, it would have been a disaster.
They could play anything, and whatever we asked them to do, they could do.
Especially Jamerson, he could play the most complex lines with that bass. That really added a lot.
And Earl Van Dyke. The drummer Benny Benjamin, who I loved dearly because he could keep a beat so like a metronome. And I love working with those guys. Anytime I can call all those guys together, I was just happy to do it.
Motown producers used the Funk Brothers whenever possible to give their records a leg up on the competition. And the hottest competition often came not from the Beatles or the Beach Boys, but from just down the hall.
The real competition was within the Motown. The Norman Whitfields, the Smokey Robinsons, the Ivy Joe Hunters, and Mickey Stevenson. That was the real competition, because you felt if you did not come up with that follow-up, somebody would be there, oh, the guys missed this time. Let's rush in and cut this. I think we got them. It was that type of thing. So that was really the only true competition that you were really aware of or felt.
All Motown's producers were trying to score with the Temptations, who were still hitless after 8 tries. Early in 1964, Smokey Robinson brought in the song that would make the Temptations his group to produce for the next 2 years.
Smokey sits down at the piano and he passes the lyrics around, and I'm reading the lyrics and I said, what? You got a smile so bright, you know you could have been a candle. I said, that's hokey. But the more I looked, at it, and we started putting the harmony together, I said, this is some pretty clever stuff, even though it was very simple, but it had a nice, unique thing about it. And once we put the voices together and rehearsed it and went in the studio and we heard the track and we put it all together, that was the one.
Whoever had the hit on the last artist would get the first shot on that same artist again. And so some people had locks on artists, like Smokey had a lock early on Mary Wells, and he also had a lock on the Temptations after The Way You Do the Things You Do. And it wasn't until he did a song called Get Ready that didn't make it that big that Norman Whitfield got a shot. And he then came up with a record called Ain't Too Proud to Beg, and it just blew Smokey out of the water. So that's the kind of competition, and everybody was fair game.
Several producers, including Gordy himself, had recorded a young trio from Detroit's Brewster Projects, but the group remained hitless for 3 years, until Holland Dozier Holland finally struck pay dirt.
We had watched people come into Motown, be signed, and get a hit record and go on. And we were the first female group there. So anyway, when Eddie brought us this song, it was to be our, I think, 12th release, something like that. I heard the song, we heard the song, and at that time I was kind of more or less the spokesperson. I spoke up, And I said, Eddie, we want a hit. This song is not a hit. And I said, it's nothing. It's like, baby, baby, where did our love go? Baby, baby. I said, it's nothing. I said, look at Martha and the Vandellas. We want a hit like theirs. We want a soulful record. And he said, Mary, trust me, this is going to be a hit. I started crying. I was begging the guy, please give us a hit. This is how desperate we had become.
In only 3 years, Berry Gordy's acts had garnered over a dozen top 10 pop hits and were poised to enter the upper echelons of show business, where few black artists had been welcome. But along the way, Motown acts had played their share of primarily black venues, the Chitlin Circuit, from rickety dance halls in Alabama to New York's Apollo Theater.
Love, you've gone from me and left behind so many memories. Hey, baby, come and get your memories of us.
The Motown Review, the very first one, was 94 one-nighters. That's 3 months of living on a bus. Out of those 94 one-nighters, we had about 3 hotel stays. So it was actually sitting on that crowded bus with a 12-piece band and 8 or 9 acts.
That was also in the days of the Freedom Riders. And when they see this bus, we came to get gas. And as we stepped out of the bus to go to the Johns, we looked down the street, and all the little houses along the street had people standing in the doorway. And behind the door was a shotgun.
There were a lot of restaurants that we went in where we had to actually go in the back door and have cold hot chocolate and cold hot dogs. And that's all that we were served.
I remember one place in Texas specifically that we went to the back, and we had to wend our way through the garbage cans to a little window about the size of, I guess about that size. And man, they would put our plates through paper plates through the window, and we ate on the garbage cans.
Oh yes, wait a minute, Mr. Postman. Wait, Mr. Postman. Oh yeah.
Before any of the tours really were established, Georgiana from the Marvelettes walked out on the stage. They said, "Now the Marvelettes," and she walked out on the stage with her eyes wide and chewing gum and looking at all the people and said, it's just country style. And I said, it's not gonna work. We gotta have a department that would groom the kids. And since most of them were ghetto kids that came from single parent homes, and didn't have all the cultural tactics that's needed, we decided to give it to them.
They asked me to open up the finishing school there, Motown Finishing School. Of course, the youngsters, they came from humble beginning, and some were rude and crude and from the street and the project. But with me, it isn't where you come from, it's where you're going.
She taught us how to be elegant, and that's what we wanted. It wasn't something, we weren't being taught something that we didn't want. We wanted to be better. We wanted to, aspire to be the best. She'll say, now, ladies. Golly, we used to hate her then.
She was the brunt of a lot of jokes, I'll say that, because as young girls, we didn't take her seriously. But I did in my heart, and I applied everything she taught me. And I can't really do anything now without thinking of Mrs. Powell. If I sit, if I talk, if I walk, if I carry myself at all, Miss Powell is there.
Marvin Gaye said to me one day, Miss Powell, he called the finishing school the charm school. Miss Powell, I don't think I need a charm school, and I don't think I need any training. I said, Marvin, you don't need as much as some of the other artists, but you do sing with your eyes closed.
I'm a stubborn kind of fella, got my mind made up to love you.
And it gives the illusion that you're singing in your sleep. And number one places around the country, you have to have your eyes open. Then we could improve on your walk because you're leading with your shoulders and your head. Everything had to be done in a classy way. So if they were doing the shake or whatever, well, we didn't do it in a vulgar way. With Diana Ross and the Supremes, we worked on singing and expressing yourself, looking pleasant and with a smile and maybe a gesture, and how to handle a mic, you see, so that the mic don't handle you. I don't want you ever to look forward, lean forward. You do not protrude the buttocks.
Berry Gordy also hired a well-respected choreographer, Charlie Atkins, to fine-tune Motown's stage shows and prepare the acts for television and upscale nightclubs.
In many cases, the artists just went out and they sang and they danced and they jumped around. And they wasn't accustomed to having to be concerned about projection and physical drama. You had to add a lot of movement that would be attractive to the ladies, and the ladies had to do movements that would attract the men. Sometimes when I was working with the Supremes on that movement, Mary used to say to me, "You're trying to teach me how to look ladylike," which is exactly what I was doing, because I was giving them moves like very feminine moves where you use your shoulders, wave your hands, and all this kind of business, and keep you so that the fellas are going to really notice what you're putting down.
We would go into artist development at Motown and work on a song, and it would take hours. And we put in hours every day learning those routines. People have often said that Motown kind of made us over and made us into these sophisticated little dolls, you know. But I think that's something that we brought within ourselves. And so Charlie was able to keep us the way we were, but still keep that sophistication and to keep it sexy and to keep the rock and roll, all that as one unit.
Charlie really started turning up the heat on as far as polishing us and spending more time in artist development, because it got to the point that we would be there so much that, man, we were getting tired of looking at each other. But it was worth it, because they were grooming us for the real big stage, the Copacabanas, the Las Vegas, the Atlantic Cities, and what have you.
Sometimes we would find that a move might be quite primitive, something that you would see just on the R&B circuit. It would go something like this here. So what we would do for the presentation and the crossover is try to bring it up and give it a little bit more sophistication. It would look something like this here.
Before the 60s were out, the Temptations and several other Motown acts were playing Las Vegas, the Ed Sullivan Show, and the country's most exclusive nightclubs.
Ah, you do me wrong, but still I'm crazy about you. Stay away too long, I can't do without you.
Gordy's goal of producing a non-stop stream of sophisticated pop entertainers had become a reality, culminating in the launching of a superstar that Motown developed nearly from the cradle, Michael Jackson of the Jackson 5. For many, Motown's success was Black America's success, a musical accompaniment to the quest for equality led by Dr. Martin Luther King. But to others, Motown was losing its soul by polishing its music and artists for white audiences. The real soulful music was coming from down south.
What the Temptations did, what the Four Tops did, what Diana Ross and the Supremes did, all of the top records across the world. But they were da 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 da. But the minute you crossed the Mason and Dixon line and got down here in Memphis, altogether different.
See? You would hear songs at Motown that had the influence of the church in the melody, but they would polish it, and they did a marvelous job at doing that. At Stax, we didn't. We just let it all hang out. We went for it, and whatever it was, that's what it was. Whatever you felt, that's what it was.
Stax Records began in 1958, taking its name from founder Jim Stewart and his sister Estelle Axton. And by 1960, a modest hit by local legend Rufus Thomas and his daughter Carla convinced Stewart to produce more black music. And Stax soon caught the ear of rhythm and blues kingpin Jerry Wexler of Atlantic Records.
It really turned me on to watch the way they recorded, because it was entirely different from what we had been doing in New York and from what everybody else was doing around the country, which was recording with written arrangements, arrangers, and studio players who read the charts.
You didn't have to prepare music. You'd play the song for them once. The artist could sit down and play or sing them the song once. They learned the song. No music in front of them telling them go from here to there to there. They learned the song. And they had this intimate relationship with each other where if after they listened to the song once, they said, you take the first verse, you do the fills here, I'll stay out. Then you can, about 2 or 3 takes, they learned the song faster than you were prepared to record it.
One of the keys to the spontaneity of Stax recordings was its tight rhythm section, Booker T and the MGs. Younger than Motown's Funk Brothers, they grew up listening to rhythm and blues and rock and roll.
Duck and I, we grew up in a great school called Messick. It was a segregated school, but the only thing we wanted to listen to was Hank Ballard and the Midnighters and Little Richard and Chuck Berry and the Platters, and that's all we wanted to dance to, you know, all those great old songs and stuff. It wasn't until really later, after we had graduated from high school, we first met Booker T.
Booker T. Jones hung out in the record shop near the studio and played saxophone and then organ on Stax sessions. And despite the fact that Memphis of the early 60s was very much a segregated city, the Stax studio band was built around the interracial quartet of Cropper, Dunn, drummer Al Jackson Jr., now deceased, and Booker T. Jones.
We just looked away from the fact that it had never been done before, and we just did it. We played the black clubs, and we played the white clubs, and we stayed in white hotels, we stayed in black hotels, we ate in white restaurants and black restaurants, and we broke the rules.
During the 1960s, the MGs, along with the Stax horn section and the writer-producer team of Isaac Hayes and David Porter, powered a host of artists, including Sam and Dave, Otis Redding, and a singer Jerry Wexler was producing, whose career seemed stalled in New York.
Sail away, I ain't got long to stay here. I said I ain't got long to stay here.
Wilson Pickett sang on a lot of gospel stuff. And one of the things, when he would get into his sort of sanctified groove on the end, you know, he would go, oh, I want to wait till the midnight hour, see my Jesus in the midnight hour, and that kind of stuff, you know. So it's kind of an ID for this guy, you know.
I would always put that in somewhere in the song, in the midnight hour, in the gospel song. I may meet Jesus. It may be soon in the morning, or it may be in the midnight hour. You see, so that midnight hour thing was kicking around all the time. This there.
Steve Cropper and Wilson Pickett rode in the midnight hour in the Lorraine Motel down the street from Stax during Pickett's first night in town. And the next morning at the recording session, Wexler assured the record's success when he showed the musicians a new dance he'd seen up north.
There was a dance in New York that we didn't know anything about in Memphis called the jerk. And so when, you know, if you remember that dance song, we was cutting in the midnight hour, and he came out and he said, well, can you put it in this jerk dance thing? That's how kind of how that delayed two came about.
Wexler was unhappy about something. He said, hey baby, can you just put it here, baby? Kink, put it here, baby. Hey, put it right, kink. I didn't know, what the hell is this man talking about?
Al and I just started kind of going with him and just kind of laying back, and I just started playing these backbeats, and it probably was one of the most influential sounds that we had, because we started cutting a lot of records after Midnight Hour hit with what we call a delayed backbeat.
Wilson Pickett's deep gospel roots, paired with 1965's dance craze, landed Midnight Hour on the pop charts and paved the way for the even churchier sound of Otis Redding to cross over. Redding had been working as a chauffeur and occasional vocalist for Johnny Jenkins and the Pine Toppers when they recorded at Stax in the fall of 1962.
We walked over to the organ and he started singing These Arms of Mine, and I was just really moved by the way he sang it, and I was just mostly listening rather than playing. And I felt the same way the first time I played with him as it did the last time I played with him. The last time I played with him, we were doing Dock of the Bay, and it was always the same with Otis. He always moved me when he sang.
Otis Redding came in, and when he came in, it changed well, the lyrics and the way that he presented his version of his music, now he wanted it to go, which turned out to be not gravelly like mine and not rhythm and blues like the others. So that's how soul, I feel like, was slowly gotten into.
In the spring of 1967, as much of rock and roll was being transformed by the emerging hippie culture, the music rooted in the churches of Black America took Europe by storm.
We sold out every place we went. We broke all attendance records. You know, we didn't go into, at that time it was the stadiums, but we were playing those small venues, and we were packing them out because they had never, you know, that gospel thing.
If you know what I'm talking about, do me a favor before I go. Do me a favor before I go. Do me a favor. Will you do me a favor? Do me a favor. Do me a favor. Do me a favor. Do me a favor.
To get an audience that involved, to tell them to stand up, do me a favor and get up. At first, you saw the reluctant, like, they weren't really sure, you know, and this guy started going to say, get up, he's kept, it's like hypnotizing. We weren't dancers, you know, we would just stand up there shaking and doing the holy dance. That's something I got out of church.
I was apprehensive, very leery of exposing Otis Redding to the thousands of flower children And here were the Jefferson Airplane. They looked like they were playing with 20-foot Marshall amps. And the Grateful Dead doing their long boogies. And here comes Booker T and the MGs, and they've got their little Sears Roebuck amps and this tiny sound.
Thank you so much. All right, now.
Well, I don't think we really knew what to expect until we got there. And that was a bit of a shock treatment.
What was it? I mean, we're out there in our green mohair suits, you know, and when we thought it was a job, you know, and then everybody's out there in these flowers, you know, the flowers around, you know, and all these flowered shirts. And I said, holy George, I said, the world's coming to an end.
This is the love crowd, right? We all love each other, don't we? Am I right? Let me hear you say yeah, man!
Otis Redding crossed over in Monterey. Wexler's apprehensions about the flower children proved unfounded. Redding's version of deep Southern soul touched a nerve in these white kids, and soul music blossomed on the charts alongside Motown and the new psychedelic bands. One 150 miles southeast of Memphis, along the Tennessee River, are the four small towns of Florence, Tuscumbia, Sheffield, and Muscle Shoals, Alabama. From this spot, deep in the Bible Belt and a stronghold of the Ku Klux Klan, came many other defining records of the soul music era. From a studio called Fame, run by former country fiddle player and songwriter Rick Hall.
It was tough. You got to remember, this was in the 60s. And this was when George Wallace was standing in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama. It's when the National Guard came to Arkansas. These are tough times, and they didn't, black people I had no problem with. If I had a problem with anybody, it was white people who didn't like me socializing or recording black music in Alabama with this all going on.
When a Man Loves a Woman by Percy Sledge brought the sound of Muscle Shoals to the attention of Jerry Wexler, who was looking for a new Southern studio after a falling out with Stax. And in 1966, he sent Wilson Pickett down to Alabama to meet Rick Hall.
I gets off the plane, Southern Airlines, and here this long, tall, white man, we call him Peckerwoods, you know, back in. He walked up like he'd known me for 500 years. Hey, Wilson, come on, we're gonna cut some funky records. Boy, we're gonna really cut some records. Come on, Wilson, come on. I said, wait, I'm nervous, you know what I mean? Now, what this white man know about producing a Wilson Pickett? Boy, I'm telling you, I'm gonna show you the studio. I'm gonna show you. Boy, we went through the cotton patch, people still picking cotton. Out there, I said, is that what I see what I think it is? Yeah, Wilson, they're still picking cotton down there. We still picking cotton. This studio was right over, you could see a studio from the cotton patch. And I have to tell you this, we cut Mustang Sally, all that funky Broadway, the land of 1,000 whole dances.
These players in Muscle Shoals were all Caucasians. Now this seems to confound perceived wisdom and all the the logic of the music professors and the commentators. How could authentic soul music and blues come out of a situation like this?
We get accused of being country fans. Now, I don't know, Spooner might have been into it a little bit, but I think David and I basically came from listening to Jimmy Reed and Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry. And that's what, my first inspiration to play guitar is when I heard a local guy play Johnny B. Good. And I said, I got to learn how to do that, you know? And that's how it all started for me. It was an inspirational moment.
Jerry Lee Lewis, when he came around, you know, through the airways, a whole lot of shaking and that sort of thing, that was one form. And of course, the Ray Charles on the other side, the rhythm and blues side, that was wonderful for me to hear. And then there was the Grand Ole Opry, you know. All those things were coming at me at once, so I took it all in.
In January 1967, the homespun studio band in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, aided in the birth of a superstar when Jerry Wexler brought in an artist newly signed to Atlantic.
I didn't know who Aretha was. The only thing I knew was that her father was the Reverend Franklin, who I listened to at WLAC in Nashville, coming home from gigs a lot of nights.
You are to reap. If you anticipate failure, believe me, you're going to fail.
I knew it was his daughter, and she'd been a secret almost in the music business. She'd never had, I don't think, even a mediocre hit at the time with CBS. They didn't know what to do with her.
When you went and left me there crying, your goodbye was even colder than
CBS Records produced Aretha singing easy jazz and pop, moving her away from the gospel music she had grown up with in her father's church. But when Jerry Wexler picked up Aretha's contract, he immediately brought her to Muscle Shoals, hoping for an environment where she could bring her natural gospel gifts to the music.
I recall we started recording, I think, 10, 11 o'clock, which we usually did. And the musicians, the studio was full of musicians. We had them three deep in the, out in the lobby, meaning that if the bass player, we had three bass players, if one couldn't cop the lick, we'd bring in another one and fire him. That's how important the sessions were. When Aretha came in and sat down at the piano, Spooner Oldham was playing electric piano, Wurlitzer. And I've always thought, and I think Aretha would agree to this, that his little part that he was playing was so important to the record that everybody just kind of fell into his groove.
When we played that song, in my mind I thought, well, it doesn't have a specific meter really. So the band just sort of looked at each other after it's finished, like, well, what do we do? I mean, where do we go now? So we were just all basically off in our little worlds trying to figure a rhythm or riff. And I just happened to be the one that, I guess, formulated this little pattern, and it started.
You're no good, heartbreaker. You're a liar and you're a cheat. And I don't know why I let you do these things to me.
Everybody was a little uptight, including myself. I was a nervous wreck because Wexler was standing over my shoulder always when I'm engineering. I believe Tom was here, Tom Dowd, sitting over there someplace, and between the two of them and the directions I were getting, I was, you know, no, turn him up, turn him down. Wait a minute, you lose the singer. Wait a minute, bring up the horn. The guitar's wiping everything out, you know, and then we didn't have sliders in those days. We had turn pots, you know, you turned them up and down. So it was an exciting, very exciting time.
There was a ruckus. One of the horn players and Aretha's then husband, Ted White, got into it. They'd been drinking from the same jug, and now this real, you know, camaraderie and great palship turned into some kind of alcoholic hostility. Well, the session blew up, and instead of staying there for a week to complete the whole album, everybody went back where they came from. Ted and Aretha went to Detroit, I went to New York. I had this wonderful record. It was finished, and I Never Loved a Man. And I had a 3-piece track on the B-side called Do Right Woman. We cut the acetates on I Never Loved a Man and sent out to the disc jockeys, and it was a tidal wave response. And our distributors and the store said, let's have the record. No record. We had no B-side. And it took me quite a while, a couple of weeks, to find Aretha. Well, we found her. She came to New York with her sisters. She and her sisters finished this record with no other help.
When it was finally released in the spring of 1967, I Never Loved a Man, backed with Do Right Woman, exploded to the top of the charts. The decade that began with Berry Gordy carefully polishing songs and performers to conform to white middle-class tastes had reached a point where music with deep African-American roots was being embraced the world over.
It looked as though soul was now the imprint, was now the rubric forever. But I had a hunch, and I even told my partner, I think it was maybe 68 or 69, I said, I have a feeling this is going to grind to a shuddering halt. I felt new things happening. One thing is what you call the rising aspirations of the inner city, that they were looking toward other things than this kind of so-called religious church-based music. There was a new spirit. It was more secular. But of course, the thing that really seemed to cap it was the assassination of Dr. King.
When we got the news, we were in the recording studio here recording. I don't recall what song we were doing, but the whole mood and the whole atmosphere in the studio suddenly changed. And the session went downhill, and we called off the session, in fact, out of respect to him and everything. But and I'm not sure that the mood of black music didn't change along with that night.
From that point on, the rhythm and blues acts slowly stopped coming to work with us after that night. I do remember that, and it was a sad occasion in a lot of respects for us.
There was a different attitude. The dreamer had died, and many of us who had lived that, we really wondered if the dream had died with the dreamer. So some of that was reflected, or a good deal of that was reflected in our attitudes, and of course that was reflected in how the songs were written, and how we sang the songs, and how we related to each other.
Going to Stax was like going to church for me every day. Absolutely. I couldn't wait to get up in the morning and get back there. I used to work 15, 16 hours a day at Stax. But somehow after that happened, it all kind of changed. Everybody was a little more serious about life and things, and particular about stuff.
Because when the wind and the winds drill right now, but all we need is you, Jesus, to linger right there.
The death of Martin Luther King was the most dramatic in a series of turning points for black music in America. Otis Redding had died in a plane crash at the end of 1967. Race riots tore apart Detroit, and Berry Gordy gradually moved his operation to Hollywood. In the fall of 1968, James Brown's Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud seemed to signal the decline of gospel-based melodic music and the rise in popularity of more aggressively rhythmic black music known as funk. For many black artists, crossing over had become less important than making a statement of identity and independence.
Next time on Rock and Roll, England gets the blues.
The only music that appealed to me at all was black rhythm and blues.
While rock crowns a new guitar king.
He took blues from the mud of the Mississippi Delta to Venus.
A production of WGBH, Boston. Funding for Rock and Roll is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the annual financial support of viewers like you. The Experience Music Project, a celebration of creativity and innovation through American popular music and culture, opening in Seattle in 1998. The National Endowment for the Arts.
Radio Shack, official sponsor of the house that rock built. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum in Cleveland, Ohio.
And by the Boston Beer Company, brewers of Samuel Adams. Do you love beer?
There is one thing San Mateo County cannot do without. It is the chance for people to succeed. Not only for themselves, but for the community as a whole. Cañada College, College of San Mateo, and Skyline College understand this. We wouldn't be a true community without them.
At the College of San Mateo, we offer a variety of courses in both horticulture and floristry. Have you ever been interested in a career in landscaping? Or how about flower arranging? California's climate allows it to be one of the main providers of plants and flowers in the United States. The horticulture department at the College of San Mateo offers large lecture rooms and workspace. Students learn to operate equipment and are provided with a 6,000 square foot glass house. The instructors at the College of San Mateo are very knowledgeable in the theoretical and practical side of horticulture. They come to the college with a wide background of field experience. In the horticulture program, students can choose from many different courses, such as landscape construction and equipment, landscape design, and plant growing. The floristry program offers classes to those who wish to pursue careers in a much different area. Students get hands-on experience in commercial and contemporary floral design. They learn procedures used in operating a florist shop, including floral design using dried and silk materials, development of individual design skills, and the fundamentals of salesmanship. Advanced study of commercial floral design includes proper care and maintenance of plants, funeral, wedding, and party arrangements. Enrolling in any of these classes is very simple, so if you're interested in learning more about these programs, contact the College of San Mateo, located at 1700 West Hillsdale Boulevard in San Mateo, or call 574-6288.
KCSM, the Bay Area's only education station.
Funding for rock and roll is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the annual financial support of viewers like you. The Experience Music Project, a celebration of creativity and innovation through American popular music and culture, opening in Seattle in 1998. The National Endowment for the Arts.
And by the Boston Beer Company, brewers of Samuel Adams. Do you love beer?
And Radio Shack, with its line of Optimus audio equipment, official sponsor of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum.
Now see right. I love you, yes I do. And there's one thing, baby, that I gotta say to you.
When I was 13, I remember slashing my own hand open and, you know, writing Blues Forever in my own blood.
I'm gonna tell you how it's gonna be. You're gonna give your love to me.
It was honest music, you know, and it had emotion.
Sweet little baby, say what you will. Your tongue wax so much when I send you to hell.
The only music that appealed to me at all was black rhythm and blues.
In the 1960s, the raw sounds of authentic American blues inspired a host of young British musicians, bored with the pop music of the day. Bands like the Rolling Stones, the Animals, and the Yardbirds built upon the bedrock of the blues, leading directly to the high-energy music of Cream, Jimi Hendrix, and Led Zeppelin, sending rock and roll in powerful new directions. At the turn of the century, the blues was played mostly by and for blacks living in the American South. But when thousands of blacks migrated north in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, they brought the blues with them. By the mid-50s, Chicago had become the mecca for black urban blues, a sound that was largely ignored by rock and roll-dominated white America. But soon the blues would find a new home, 4,000 miles away.
I heard John Lee Hooker singing things like, I've been working in a steel mill, trucking steel like a slave all day, you know. And I woke up this morning and my baby's gone away, you know. And I related to that directly because that was happening to people, to grown men on my block.
By the early 1960s, black bluesmen were beginning to venture across the Atlantic.
I was gone from the first time I heard Muddy Waters' guitar. I heard him rehearsing in the City Hall in Newcastle on a summer's night. The doors were open, and I could hear this electric guitar echoing across the city center, and I, whoa, what is that?
By 1962, Burden was playing rhythm and blues with the Animals in the Newcastle club scene. They soon became the area's leading band.
And there's one thing, baby, that I gotta say to you. You know I love you, baby. I'll keep you satisfied.
Our first gig would be go on stage about 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. We'd finish that place at 11 o'clock, drive across by then to the downbeat and play there till 5 in the morning. On a Saturday alone, we'd have 7 hours on stage in front of an audience, not sitting in your bedroom practicing.
Yeah, it was genuine underground. And it was amazing to find out that what we were doing in Newcastle, which we thought was strictly our thing, was being done at the same time in other cities by other people.
Belfast in Northern Ireland was also seeing an explosion of bands, inspired by the American blues records brought in by merchant seamen. The rich jazz and blues collection acquired by shipyard worker George Morrison fascinated his young son, George Ivan.
Well, John Lee Hooker says it's the truth. That's what I believe. Blues is the truth. Because it's not, you can't glamorize it, you know. It just is what it is. You know, some days are good and some days are bad, and this is reality.
We've been walking down by the old graveyard. The morning fall.
Morrison began performing at the age of 14. His group Them moved to the forefront of rhythm and blues in Ireland and gained a following at Belfast's Maritime Hotel.
It was very slow when it started. There weren't that many people to begin with, but it gradually sort of built up. And so when that took off, then it became, you know, more acceptable.
In the sleepy confines of London's white middle-class suburbs, the compelling sounds of rhythm and blues captured the imagination of students at local art colleges. But the records were hard to find.
You couldn't buy blues records then. There were Josh White records and semi-blues sort of things, but they were unobtainable. You never heard them on the radio, you never could buy a record of blues anywhere. They had to be imported, so you heard about people that had a Muddy Waters album and you borrowed it off them or had a tape made of it. And there was a kind of underground that's how it got to people.
When Chicago's Chess Records found a new British distributor through the Pie label, material from Muddy Waters, Sonny Boy Williamson, Willie Dixon, Elmore James, and Howlin' Wolf became widely available and successful throughout the UK, much to the surprise of the label's owners.
We had Howlin' Wolf even on the charts. Smokestack Lightning was on the white charts. And Pie became a very hot record company, one of the new English record companies, and we sort of rode along with it. The English discovered chess, really. The real fanatics always knew it, but the mainstream English music lovers discovered it.
The growing interest in rhythm and blues encouraged musicians to set up clubs devoted entirely to blues music. At the forefront were Cyril Davis and Alexis Korner.
We wanted to play electric music, and then we were in trouble, because the only clubs that we'd played, apart from our own when we were playing acoustic, were jazz clubs. Then when we went electric, it really was a case of out, and don't you dare set foot in here again with all that electricity. So we had to start our own club. And there was a strange assortment of people working around then, all of whom wanted to get into the blues thing. Charlie Watts and Mick Jagger and Paul Jones.
Alexis Korner's shows at the Ealing Club made it the most important blues venue in Britain, attracting musicians from all over the country.
It showed me that it was definitely worthwhile considering moving to London and, you know, transferring my day job in art, graphic design. So I started recruiting guys under the name of John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. And Alexis Korner was the one who really introduced me to musicians who were around at that time.
It was a kind of a magical gathering of people that had fallen in love with his vibe, and be standing there shoulder to shoulder with Keith Richard and Mick and those guys, and we'd stand in line waiting for Alexis to say, okay, you can come up, you know, you're next, and why don't you two sing together? And so he was like the grand master of ceremonies, and it was fun.
When Corner set up the Ealing Club, Britain was riding the first wave of Beatlemania. But to blues enthusiasts, the Liverpool sound was just lightweight pop compared to their own more challenging music. It was at a suburban train station that a young art student, Keith Richards, approached Mike Jagger, attracted by the blues records he was carrying.
This cat's together, right? I mean, he's got Best of Muddy Waters and Rockin' at the Hops by Chuck Berry under his arm, you know. Hey, man. Nice to see you, but where'd you get the records?
Drawn to the growing scene at the Ealing Club, Jagger and Richards met fellow blues lover Brian Jones. The result, the Rolling Stones.
You one of the original members?
Yes, one of the original members.
What were you doing before you joined?
Well, just sort of bumming around waiting for something to happen, really. You know, I had quite a few jobs, and I was trying to get a band going, but it was unsuccessful until I met up with Mick and Keith, and then...
He played with Alexis and the band that Alexis had, that Charlie was playing drums in. He actually persuaded Alexis to let him get on stage and play. And he heard an Elmore James record for the first time in his life, which I never heard one until about 65 or something, or 64. He said the whole universe shuddered, you know, when he heard this, you know, that slide thing. He immediately got a slide and started playing, and there he was playing when Mick and Keith first went to see the Alexis Corner band.
The first time the Stones played, 3 people came. And I remember Brian Jones saying to me, you know, there's more of us on the stage than there is in the audience, because there were 6 at the time with Ian playing piano. I said, Brian, how many people do you think we can get into this place? 300? I said, we'll have them. Just imagine 300 people in here and we'll get them. And we went from 3 to 9 to 27 to 100 to 300. All of a sudden, there were queues outside at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
And we just played these rhythm, this Bo Diddley rhythm, for 20 minutes, one song. And the kids used to get hypnotic, you know, and they'd be doing this dance which they couldn't move to. They'd just move their arms and their heads and that, because you couldn't do anything else. You was squashed, so it became a dance, you know.
In a letter to the BBC in January 1963 asking for airtime, Brian Jones articulated the group's philosophy. The band's policy is to play authentic Chicago rhythm and blues music, using outstanding exponents of the music such as Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, Bo Diddley, Jimmy Reed, etc. The BBC turned them down on the basis that their singer sounded too black.
I'm gonna tell you how it's gonna be. You're gonna give your love to me. Love can last more than one day. Well, love is love and I fade away. Well, love is love and I fade away.
As the Stones began to find success, they signed up with manager Andrew Loog Oldham, who initially tried to clean up the raw rhythm and blues image of the band.
Andrew had this real talent for sort of making a splash and a fuss and centering attention on you, which would have taken us a lot longer probably if we hadn't have had someone like Andrew. And he was younger than any of us, so he had a very young and very, very irreverent attitude.
We were scruffy. We were the only band around that never wore a uniform, of course, right then, because we didn't have the money for them, so we just used to go on stage in whatever we were wearing at the time. Andrew took us down and tried to get us into these little suits and smarten us up for television and all that sort of thing. We didn't really want to know, and so we just... Various members just lost bits of the uniform, so we never looked the same anyway.
Wherever they go, and you get a lot of traveling in this business, the fan mail follows them around, and it all gets answered. Bill Wyman dressing and reading at the same time. Brian Jones tuning up. A matter of seconds now, and they'll be on stage. And just listen to that audience.
I said the joint was rocking, going round and round. Yeah, reeling and rocking, what a crazy sound. And they never stopped rocking till the moon went down. It sounds so sweet, I had to take me a chance. Rose out of my seat, I just had to dance. Started moving my feet, oh, to clapping my hands. I said the joint was rocking.
By the time the Stones found chart success in late 1963, they had already outgrown small venues like Giorgio Gomelski's Crawdaddy Club, and Gomelski began looking for a band to replace them.
We didn't want a copycat band of the Stones just to keep the audience, you know. I always felt that we could go further. One element that was kind of missing in the Stones were instrumental improvisation, you know. And so we said, we need to get a band where there are people that can play solos.
Gomelski found what he was looking for in the Yardbirds guitarist, Eric Clapton. Only 18, Clapton was already a knowledgeable blues player, and his fierce devotion to the music shaped the band's initial direction.
Through most of my youth, that my back was against the wall. And that the only way to survive that was with dignity and pride and with courage. And I heard that in certain forms of music. I heard it most of all in the blues, because that was an individual. It was always one man with his guitar versus the world. And it wasn't a company, it wasn't a band or a group or anything. It was, when it came down to it, it was one guy who was completely alone and had no options, no alternatives whatsoever other than just sing and play to ease his pain. And that echoed what I felt in many aspects of my life.
Well, I'd heard him quite a few times with the Yardbirds in the early configurations when they were starting, and probably for the first year. But I mean, Eric really hadn't got his chops together, as you know, he'd probably tell you. I mean, he was just learning to play the blues.
You made me walk from Chicago. Oh, Louisa, you've been gone. Oh, right.
Clapton was the first of 3 successive lead guitarists who would make the Yardbirds one of the most influential groups of the decade. The Yardbirds released only one album with Clapton in the lineup, but even before it hit the charts, Clapton had moved on. By 1964, blues in Britain was on the road, but most of the bands were finding success hard to come by.
You only see bands that were going up and down the M1, you know, living out of a suitcase at Ford Transit Advantage, checking in out of B&Bs. I mean, that was life, so there wasn't any speculation about whether you were going to do this or do that. You were just, you know, out there somewhere, you know. And then when that was over, you might checked in, had a couple of days off, and then there was more. So there wasn't any time to sort of... The Rolling Stones was a different operation. They had like a whole management setup, and they, you know, had money and that. I mean, you know, we never got paid. We never got anything.
Most blues groups paid little attention to the business side of music and often found themselves artistically compromised. The Animals' first single, a song chosen by their management, was a chart success, but the Animals hated the song's poppy sound and refused to perform it live.
No, you've done very well. You've got into the hit parade. You're the first Northeast group to get into the hit parade. Have you got a follow-up record coming up?
Yeah, it's called The House of the Rising Sun. It's on Columbia.
You're going to do that one for us in just a minute, aren't you?
Yeah.
What other things have you got lined up? Big dates?
Yeah, well, we just finished one, the biggest one of our life, my life anyway. That's Chuck Berry tour.
We're going on the Chuck Berry tour. Everybody's going to try and out-rock Chuck Berry. What we need is a song that will stick in people's memories, and we got a good slot on the Chuck Berry tour. And let's do this this song that is like out of tempo. It's not that dun 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 dun. It's dun 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 dun. And people will remember it. They'll leave the theater remembering the song, the one song that was different out of the whole night. And it worked.
America had all but forgotten its blues heritage, but was about to be hit by the revolution that had jolted the British pop scene. In 1964, the Rolling Stones and the Animals toured the U.S., bringing the voice of British blues to America.
Times Square welcomes the Animals in person, and the young Englishman will be around for a while filming an MGM movie in Manhattan. The teenage magic so hard to explain to some grown-ups follows the Animals as they take temporary refuge in their hotel.
All of a sudden, bands who we knew, you know, we'd played with, you know, these bands played the Go-Go, we'd seen, we'd met along the line. There was almost like this little party that went on of all English bands. That suddenly 60% of the music in the world was English music.
We really thought that when we went to America and played them that music, it wouldn't work because it was their music. We didn't realize that the white kids had never heard that music.
The only place you could hear black music was on the road. When we'd be on the road, we'd be playing in Nashville, Tennessee, for instance. And you'd have to cross the tracks to hear real black music being played in shacks, you know, on the Chitlin circuit. Corrugated shacks out on, you know, at some crossroads somewhere on the outskirts of town. And it was just within the black community that you could hear the real thing.
Drawn to the roots of urban blues, the Stones made the pilgrimage to Chicago and their spiritual home, Chess Records, at 2120 South Michigan Avenue.
I think that the Stones understood a certain sexual energy that was in Chess Records music and amplified that into their own music.
Like everybody in the world loves the winter. Chess Studios was hotter than hell. And everybody wanted to come to Chess.
But they wanted the Chess sound, you know. They started out doing all Chess sounds, and I always used to say that they wanted to mimic. They would have loved to have done Chess Records to be exactly like the originals, but it came out like the Rolling Stones, which was great.
I don't want you wash my clothes. I don't want you keep my home. I don't want, 'cause I'm tired of blue. I just wanna make love to you.
In the spring of 1965, Eric Clapton joined John Mayall's Blues Breakers. The Yardbirds had become too pop-oriented to suit Clapton's musical taste.
I didn't like the way they were going, and I thought that it was all really just a joke for them. When I was actually fanatic at that point. Fanatic and wanting to get deeper and deeper and deeper into the blues, and they wanted to get lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter into what ended up as being 10cc type music.
They wanted to do pop music and he wanted to pursue blues. By the time he'd left them, of course, he was what I consider the finest that there was. There wasn't anybody better than him.
With Clapton's departure, the Yardbirds needed a new guitarist. At London's Eel Pie Island, one of the favorite clubs on the blues circuit, Jeff Beck was building up a following with his band, the Tridents.
I was buttonholed by Gomelski's sidekicks. They said, you're going to be in a top band, you know. I said, really? When is this? They said, be at the Marquee tomorrow morning, or whatever it was. And smarten up as well. I went, oh, don't like the sound of this. I thought it might have been the Beatles. And I look in there, there's a bench with about 20 guitar players there with all their cases. So all of a sudden I was in this sort of audition, and I didn't enjoy that part of it at all. And Keith comes running off the stage with his squeezy respirator, and he said, don't worry, he said, all these people are just, you know, before we knew you were coming, we'd audition them and given them a date to turn up, so if you can just sit around and listen to them, or come back in an hour, you know. And some of them were pretty good, and I thought, well, this is a bit embarrassing here. So he said, by the way, what music are you into? And I said, well, blues. And that was bingo, that was right. I said the right thing. He said, play me some blues. He had another puff, and I said, well, I haven't got an amp. He said, just play me a few lines. So I played some Matt Murphy runs and Buddy Guy, and he says, that's it. Everybody else, you can go.
The Yardbirds had chosen Beck for his experimental approach. Fuzz tone, feedback, harmonic sustain, and dive bomber runs were all part of his expressive arsenal, which moved the group into its most successful period.
The Yardbirds were sort of a compromise. You know, at least I was in a band that was working and doing what I loved to do. But there was this nagging, you know, from America all the time. You know, could it possibly be that we'll get a gig in America? But we actually got to our first tour in 1965 and got really close to the bare bones of where we'd all come from. Chess Studios, Sun Studios, and stuff like that. And Chess was synonymous with great drums and great bass sounds and harmonica. And it was instantly recognizable from any English recordings, which we loathed. We didn't like the, if you'll pardon the expression, BBC. There was no slur on it, but the studio technicians didn't really have any grasp on where the dirt was coming from, the vital ingredient in the sound that seemed to be automatic to the Chess people and America in general, that they had a much more good understanding, clear understanding of what you wanted and knew how to get it.
When we first started playing together, we started playing because we wanted to play rhythm and blues, and Howling Wolf was one of our greatest idols, and it's a great pleasure to find you've been booked on this show tonight. It really is a pleasure.
Thanks to Howling Jack Wood.
So I think it's about time you shut up and we had Howling Wolf on stage.
The strength of the British invasion in the U.S. led directly to a renaissance for homegrown blues artists, who began to be appreciated by white America for the first time.
How many more years till I have to let you dog me around? How many more years till I have to let you dog me around?
Ho, 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 ho. Whoa, baby. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Walk your walk, baby.
One thing that the R&B scene did for British music is that became the Chicago blues became the starting point for people when they were looking around for a source of material to cover, to play. And then, you know, they found their own identities, and of course everybody went off into their different directions on a very gradual basis.
Well, I've told you once and I've told you twice, but you never listen to my advice.
Jagger and Richards started writing original songs for the Stones. Many became huge hits, but Brian Jones became increasingly dissatisfied, feeling that the Stones were departing from their blues roots.
Well, the moment that Mick and Keith write the songs, then Brian was out on a limb, wasn't he? Because Brian was like the leader. Then Mick came up as a figurehead, the singer, who got more of the spotlight on stage. So then Brian's sort of there, and then Keith's playing solos. So he's there, and he jumps about a bit more than Brian, because Brian just kind of hops, you know, and does his tambourine bit, but Keith's diving about. So then he's losing a bit more focus, and then when Andrew and Mick and Keith get into their little trio, then he kind of gets a bit ostracised, you know, and pushed away, and he kind of dropped out a bit.
The Jagger-Richards partnership produced 3 consecutive #1 hits in the UK. The second of these, Satisfaction, gave them the breakthrough in the US they had been looking for.
Well, Mama don't allow no skiffle down here. Oh, no, she don't. Mama don't allow no skiffle down in here. Well, we don't care what Mama don't allow. Gotta play that skiffle any old how. Mama don't allow no skiffle down in here.
What are your two names?
James Page and...
David Housker. Both from Epsom? Yes. And you're just learning to play the guitar?
Yes,
Can you from a teacher? Do you play anything except skiffle?
Yes, Spanish and dance. I think.
Do you as well? Getting a move on. What are you going to do when you leave school? Take up skiffle?
No, I want to do, biological research.
But by the mid-1960s, Jimmy Page had become totally devoted to music, not biological research.
And that was at the time when I was hanging around with Jeff, going to Yardbirds gigs, and the bass player decided to leave the band, and I joined on bass just to help me out on a couple of gigs, and then it was on to guitar.
When Jim joined, I lost focus of where the Yardbirds should have been going, or could have been going. And it was the fact that we were overqualified in the guitar department and underqualified in the writing department. And we really should have taken stock there and said, look, we'll waive the tour, we ain't ready for that, you know, but instead we just took the opportunity and it burned itself out.
It was 33 days, 25 of those were doubles. So we finished off the first half of the show, and then we'd drive on to the next show. And I mean, we were all in a bus. People were sleeping in the luggage racks. I mean, Beck stood about 3 days of this and jacked it in.
I freaked out, went mad, had a breakdown, and I think I walked out and left the band. The Yardbirds continued without me, and I disappeared, and Jim carried on.
High-volume, supercharged rhythm and blues was now firmly on the agenda. Eric Clapton had left the Blues Breakers in 1966 to set up power supergroup Cream, along with Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker, both former Alexis Corner players.
We didn't give a damn about who liked what we did or whether or not it was going to be successful or not. We just had a great time playing with one another. But we were all just going in completely different directions half the time. And then we'd blend in and get together. But I was very, very happy there for a while. None of us was the band leader, so no one would say, stop, all right, enough. So if one of us took off, let him go and see one another at the other end.
several early blues classics, including Crossroad Blues, originally recorded by the legendary Robert Johnson. More than any other bluesman, Johnson embodied the romantic myth of the lone guitarist who had sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads in exchange for a formidable musical talent. Their improvisational approach brought Cream 2 years of non-stop critical and popular acclaim. But by 1966, the Animals were crumbling. Keyboardist Alan Price had left, splitting up the successful songwriting team of Price and Burden.
Half the gang was doing LSD and half the gang was drinking. And the drinking side were pointing fingers and going, "You're frying your brain, you know, you're gonna die, you're gonna lose it." The half that were doing the drugs were going, "Look at the state of you, you know, you're totally drunk and incapable, you can't even stand."
We're just sitting semi-pissed in Tokyo this night. And Eric and I, we just said, it's not as much fun as it used to be, is it now? Why don't we call it a day? And literally, we knew we had committed ourselves to contracts until the September of that year. And we said, as soon as them contracts are fulfilled, we'll just call it a day, you know.
Chandler, at 27, decided to try his hand at artist management and began looking for new talent.
The last two of the Animals were set up for America in July of '66. And I went over in July, a couple of weeks ahead of the rest of the Animals, because I was going out with a very attractive lady in New York at the time. And she'd played me this song by Tim Rose, of Hey Joe. And I thought, God, that's a great song. When I get back to England, I'm going to find a band that I can record this with. And we went down to the Cafe War in Greenwich Village, and Jimmy was there. It was like a pickup band. He just met that